So as we move into the last reading, um, we're coming to a very famous part of the dialogue and a very famous part of Plato and a very difficult one. Much of what Socrates does in this reading is tell a kind of an autobiographical story of his own intellectual development or his own philosophical development. And this is a prelude, really, to his last argument for the immortality of the soul. And it's important to know that that's the objective here. If we look at the beginning of the reading, he, in his own mind, seems to have met the Simmias objection about the soul as harmony, though I'm not, really sure that he has. But he's moving on to the Sebes objection about the soul, the notion that the soul, although it may be more long-lasting than the body, that there's no reason to believe that the soul doesn't wear out and die eventually, just like the body does. And Socrates, for some reason, for his own reasons, Plato for his own reasons, takes this objection of Sebes more seriously than the one from Simmias. Although I got to say that I don't, but that's what it is. If we look here on page 48, beginning of the reading, Socrates says, "My good friend, do not be overconfident, or some evil eye will overturn the argument that is to come. However, that we will leave to God. Let us, like Homer's heroes, advancing boldly, see if there is anything in what you say. The sum of what you seek is this: you require me to prove to you that the soul is indestructible and immortal." So that's what it's almost like we're back to the beginning. That general idea or that general objective to prove that the soul is immortal is, again, what he's doing. So everything that follows in this reading should really be judged ultimately on the basis of whether he actually does that. In what follows, does he prove that the soul is indestructible and immortal? He takes a roundabout way of doing that. Like I said, if you look, he says at the bottom of page 48, "If you like, I will give you my own experiences. And if you think that you can make use of anything that I say, you may employ it to satisfy your misgivings." And then he tells about, being a young man and trying to understand the world. He says he was interested in the question of the causes of generation and decay. How do things come into being? And he's thinking of living things. How do they come into being, generation? And how do they go out of being? How do they die? How do they decay? Or all things. How do things come into being and go out of being? It's a general sort of question about nature. And he begins to tell his own story here, Socrates, which is quite interesting. How does the world work? How do living things come into being? What is life? Why do they die? And in a bigger sense, but the universe, why do all natural things, all physical objects, what's their origin and what's their manner of being? And he talks about, his development here, how he read some books. He came across this book here. It's page 50 by a philosopher named Anaxagoras. And he was like, wow, yeah. Looks like this Anaxagoras guy has it figured out. How does nature work? Why are things the way they are? And long story short, he finds that he's disappointed in this book. He's disappointed in Anaxagoras' philosophy. He doesn't really, it's unsatisfying. He says at the bottom of page 50, "These reflections made me very happy. I thought that I had found in Anaxagoras a teacher of the cause of existence after my own heart. And I expected that he would tell me first whether the earth is flat or round, and that he would go on to explain to me the cause and the necessity, and tell me what is best, and that it is best for the earth to be of that shape. You see how he's casting things in a certain way. I mean, in terms of the universe should be explained in terms of what is best, which is very different from the way we think about science, right? He continues that if he said that the Earth was in the center of the universe, I thought he would explain that it was best for it to be there, and I was prepared not to require any other kind of cause, et cetera, et cetera. And then he says, this is the next paragraph, he says, all my splendid hopes were dashed to the ground. For as I went on reading, I found that the writer made no use of mind at all, and that he assigned no causes for the order of things. Essentially, Socrates felt that a purely physical, causal explanation of nature was unsatisfying, and it didn't really answer the kind of questions he had. Like, how do we explain something that happens? How do we explain an event in nature? Like, how do we fully explain it? Look at what he says here at the bottom of page 51. He says, I thought that he was exactly like a man who should begin by saying that Socrates does all that he does by mind, and who, when he tried to give a reason for each of my actions, should say first that I am sitting here now because my body is composed of bones and muscles, and that the bones are hard and separated by joints, while the muscles can be tightened and loosened, and together with the flesh and the skin, which holds them together, cover the bones, and that, therefore, when the bones are raised in their sockets, the relaxation and contraction of the muscles make it possible for me now to bend my limbs, and that is the cause of my sitting here with my legs bent. And in the same way, he would go on to explain why I am talking to you. He would assign voice and air and hearing and 1,000 other things as causes. That is, if the question is why is Socrates sitting in the jail, a purely physical answer, well, he's sitting because his muscles are contracted in a certain way, and the force of gravity is pulling him down to the earth, and that is being there's a counter that is being countered by the force of his muscles, which is powered by certain metabolic processes in his body, and so on and so on. That wouldn't be a real explanation. I mean, all of those things would be true, but that wouldn't answer the question, why is Socrates sitting in the jail? To answer the question, why is Socrates sitting in the jail, you have to you have to resort to non-physical concepts, right? As he continues, he said, but he would quite forget to mention the real cause, which is that since the Athenians thought it right to condemn me, I have thought it right and just to sit here and to submit to whatever sentence they may think fit to impose. That is, if we're really going to answer the question, why is Socrates sitting in the jail, we can't just give a physical description, a physical explanation of it. We have to refer to justice. We have to refer to what Socrates thinks is right. That's the real reason he's sitting there. Those other things are true, but they're not a real complete explanation. So it's quite interesting, the idea. But where is it leading? Well, it's leading ultimately to his own intellectual sort of his breakthrough as a student of philosophy. And that is the kind of explanations that he decided that he would seek were different from the purely physical ones that he found in, let's say, the books of Anaxagoras, that he would look for explanations of the world in terms of other things in another way. And that leads us again to this question of the forms of the absolutes, which has come up several times already in the course of the argument, but now we really have to address it.